Hey folks, Quillatine here, and welcome to what I'm hoping is going to be a relatively quick tutorial for Europa Universalis 5, where I answer the question that I think comes up the most in my Twitch chats, people coming in asking, hey, when do you turn a rural location, a sort of village location, into an urban one, i.e. a town or a city? It's actually a really great question, and I'm going to try to address this. First of all, how do you do it? Well, if you look at any particular location, right, this symbol over here tells you the level. So the circle location like this is a rural settlement. The square, like Durlock, this is a town. And the pentagon, like what we have in Strasbourg, although you can't quite see it right over there, the pentagon is a city. So that is a way to see the current level. But if you do select a location, you'll see again the symbol here at the top, but also more importantly, the symbol again here. This is actually not just a symbol, this is the button. Clicking this button will upgrade or promote this location from its current level to the next level up. So right now, if I were to click in Lichtenberg, which is urban, it would turn into a town. Or if I were to look at a town like Heidelberg, and if I were to click this button, it would become a city. Obviously, I would need the money for it. My Strasbourg run, we were making money hand over fist. This save is from the start of one of my streams. By the end of the stream, I think we were making like 180 ducats a month. Strasbourg is just making money hand over fist. I'm loving this run so much. I highly recommend playing it. Anyway. So I don't have the cash right now, so I can't hit that button regardless, but we're still going to be talking about it. So that's how you do it. And then the question is when you do it. And the short of it is, can you afford to lose some of your RGO / food production, which is linked, though not exactly the same, and does the location have pretty good control? I'm going to address the control side of it first. One of the reasons you would turn a rural location into an urban location, like why you would found a town, right, is because you want to build urban style buildings, which is most of your valuable buildings are urban buildings. Those are the ones that produce your best goods and make you serious amount of cash. It's also how you can build things like, say, libraries and universities to increase literacy and therefore impact your research rates in a variety of different ways. You know, your good stuff comes from making urban locations, from turning a rural location into a town, and then possibly turning a town into a city. That's less of an important step. Turning a town to a city is way less relevant and way less interesting than rule into a town in the first place. The biggest thing with the city, while there may be some buildings that are unique to cities that might be important to you, the biggest thing with the city is that it increases your population cap, the limit of how many people you can have in a particular location. It also limits the number of buildings that you can have in a location. So if I look at Baden really quickly, it has a building limit of 48. Baden as a town can have up to 48 buildings and no more currently. If we look at Strasbourg, that would be a problem. Strasbourg currently has 112 fully staffed buildings. Therefore, if Strasbourg was only a town, we actually wouldn't be able to have this many buildings in here. It's still, as it turns out, Strasbourg is nowhere near its population cap at all. Strasbourg can have 800,000 people currently because it is in a city. So, and it would have been fine as a town. So like Baden has a cap of, I think 214. And even like rural locations actually have pretty high numbers. So we can have 161 people in Lichtenberg still as a rural location. So in my game, I'm not feeling the need to promote to a city to raise the population cap, but I might need it because I have so much money. I might need it to be able to build more buildings, which is a great problem to have. So that's why, the reason I made Strasbourg into a city when I did is mostly just because it was a fun button to click. I didn't need it at the time, but at this point in the game, I would have needed to city up Strasbourg. Okay, going back to the rural to urban question. Do you make a town in the first place? And I want to talk about control first because it's the easiest thing to say. And again, these buildings are super valuable, but the way you extract the value from a building a lot of times is through the tax income, both for you and for your states. And control is one of the biggest values that affect that. So control has a huge knock-on effect, including something like local crown power. And local crown power is extremely important for lots of things, including your ability to influence it, tax dollars, levies, I think are... Well, you do get levies through some of your states as well. But some of the things I'm going to talk about when I talk about control isn't control doing it directly, but the things that are reliant on control. But one of the big things you can see here is the tax base. So Lichtenberg should earn $12 in tax, but because we don't have perfect control, we're only collecting about $11 in tax. And then from that, we don't get all of it because then that is based on things like crown power, for example. So that's one of the big things over there. And you can see it also affects levy size and market protection and yada, yada, yada. So high control is important. If you have a location location with 0% control, it's almost the same as not owning it in the first place. So urbanizing that location probably won't give you much bang for your buck. One of the biggest things that influences control is proximity, which you can see over here. So you can almost think of it as proximity is the most important thing because proximity affects control, which is the most important thing, and control affects, say, crown power, which is the most important, which one's the most important thing? Where does it start? I don't know. But proximity is a big question. So I think generally you're going to be wanting to town places that have high proximity because they have high control. It is worth noting that creating a town does boost your maximum control. Towns have a 5% bonus. If we go here and here and here, I got a town tooltip. You can see that max control over here by 5%. Also, some of the buildings you can build in urban locations, like say temples, for example, give an extra 5% boost as well. So in fact, if I go in town Lichtenberg, I'll be sitting, so I'm going to go from 92, well, basically 93% maximum control to 98% maximum control. And then if I build a temple, then I'll in fact be overcap, but I'll be sitting at 100% maximum control here, which is great. Exactly what we want from an urban location. I mean, in theory, it's what we want from every location, but it's much more important for urban ones. So that's the one thing. High control areas are good. If we compare to another place, Neustadt over here, my maximum control here is only 35%. So even if I were to town, ignore the current control, but other things were happening. So my maximum control currently is 35%, partially because this place hasn't been integrated yet, but even if I were to town this and I were to build a temple, I'd still only be sitting at 45% maximum control. So I really wouldn't be exploiting this location very well. Things will get better as this place gets stabilized post-war, but for now, it does not appeal to me as a town location. That might change later, but we'll see. So that's number one. Okay, so it's very likely that places near your capital are probably going to be good candidates for towns because they have high proximity and therefore high control. But that's not the only factor, and there's other ways to boost those, especially as you go forward through the ages. You know, I'm about to unlock paved roads in this run here, which is going to decrease the proximity cost for things, so everything's going to be closer and therefore higher control. The next thing, and this might be more important than control, or it's more complicated than just directly looking at your control number, is the RGO situation. So RGOs, these are resource gathering operations. Every single location on the map has a good that it produces simply through RGO buildings. And these are great because RGO buildings employ laborers, which are very easy for your peasants to promote to. Laborers are part of the peasant class or your commoner class. So they don't eat a lot of food. They don't need a lot of luxury goods. They're very easy to maintain. RGOs are cheap to build and cheap to maintain. They have no inputs whatsoever. So all they do is produce stuff for you. So they're a great source they're the backbone of your economy, really. That's where everything starts from, is selling some raw goods. And then later converting those raw goods to better ones through buildings, and then, having massive control through trade so that you can sell your goods to the best possible market at the best possible price. This has a whole knock-on effect. Goods have different base prices. So if we look at legumes, it has a base price of 1.0. If we look at wheat, which is what Strasbourg produces, it also has a base price of 1.0. You might think these two goods are therefore very equivalent. We're going to see a reason why they're not relatively shortly. But other goods have different values. So if we look at Baden, which produces wine, it has a base price of 2, and Hochberg, Freiburg, which I don't control, but has silver, which has a base price of 8. Now, one of the big things is how many RGOs can you build in a location? You can see that in Lichtenberg, I can have a maximum of 12 RGOs. I happen to be at 12 of 12, but that is our maximum. In Strasbourg, we have a maximum of 10. Where do these numbers come from? Well, first of all, these values come from some flat numbers. Every location has a base of 2,000. Every 1,000 is an RGO level because every RGO can employ 1,000 people. So every location has a base of 2,000. It then gets an additional number, a flat number added to it based on its population and its development. That then gets multiplied by a variety of little numbers. You can see literacy, my land focus, some of my techs, for example, gives us a boost. And we can see that obviously there's a huge number here because this is a rural location. Rural locations get a plus 100% modifier. They have basically double the maximum RGO size of an urban location. Only rural locations have this. Both towns and cities do not have this value at all. It just goes away completely. Now, because of the other modifiers, it's not exactly double. So I'm at 12 here. I can tell you when Lichtenberg gets turned into a town later in the stream, it goes from 12 to 7. So it's not exactly cut in half, but it's around there. So obviously, if you have a really valuable location, you may not want to go and convert it into a town because you will lose RGOs, and therefore you won't get as much like super high valuable silver, for example. It's slightly more complicated than that when we're talking about food resources because resources like legumes, wheat, livestock, all kinds of different things have a food value on them. And this can differ. So here, I have 12 RGOs, so I'm producing 12 legumes, is more or less how we're going to think about it. There's other modifiers that can kick in, but let's just say that's the case. 12 RGOs, I get 12 legumes. But each legume isn't worth the same amount of food. Each legume is worth 5 food. If we look at the food output of this location, you can see that my raw food being made by my legume production is 60, which makes sense. 12 times 5 equals 60. So I'm getting 60 food from that. I get a tiny bit of food from some other things, but the vast majority is from the RGO itself. If we look at Strasbourg and its wheat, each unit of wheat produces 8 food. Wheat is a better food resource than legumes. Somewhere, and I'm not sure where, I have a wool production, but I'm not entirely, I can't remember where it is. Wool is a good that is, well, it's wool, and therefore, it's a slightly more valuable good on the market, but it's still a food resource because it comes from sheep. It turns out you can eat the sheep as well. So there's the wool. So wool is worth 2.5 on the market. So we like wool because it makes slightly more money, but it still counts as a food resource, which is pretty amazing. If we look at Neustadt over here, its livestock is worth slightly more than what wheat or legumes is, and it's also a really food-rich location. So when you convert from a rural location to an urban location, you lose how many RGOs you might have because the maximum goes down, but also the food goes down a bit. And why is that? So again, we got the raw food production, and then it gets multiplied by some sort of food productivity, which a rural location has a 10% boost. A town location not only loses that 10%, but actually has a 20% penalty. So a town actually, even if you didn't lose your RGOs, although you will, your RGOs are going to be cut by about half. Furthermore, you're going to lose an additional 30% to the final food production as well. And in cities, it becomes a 33% penalty. So you can see Strasbourg, it's a 33% penalty over here. So even though Strasbourg has a large number of wheat RGOs, and the reason its maximum is so high is because it has good production or good population and a lot of development. So I still end up with 10 wheat RGOs over here. But the wheat, even though they're worth 8 each as a base, we are getting this 33% penalty. If this was a rural location, this would be plus 10%. So it's a pretty big swing. So if you're looking at a province, let's say I controlled just the province of, the actual province name over here is Upper Rheingraben. So from Baden through Offenburg, through Hochberg and Freiburg and Mulheim, these 5 provinces along the Rhine here are actually all part of Upper Rheingraben. And only one of these places produces any food. It's Offenburg over here with fruit, and fruit is only worth 4 per. So as a whole, let's say my entire nation was these 5 provinces. These 5 provinces would be running a massive food deficit because each one of these locations has negative raw food. Even Offenburg currently, because it's actually a town. So we're really not producing, we don't have as many fruit RGOs as we could, and we're getting a malus to our food production. It also doesn't help that it's currently winter, so we're getting a further hit over there currently. So this, if this was my nation, these 5 provinces, I would have to spend a lot of money buying food from the market, which might be fine. We have a silver deposit, maybe we can make it work, I don't know. But when I'm looking over here at Lichtenberg, Lichtenberg is part of my province of Lower Alsace, which has a huge food surplus because Lichtenberg, Hagenau, and Strasbourg itself all produce food. Strasbourg doesn't produce much of a surplus, but it is a city that's feeding itself, and that's pretty remarkable. So we could actually afford, we'd cut our legume RGOs in half, well, technically not quite half, because we'd end up with 7, not 12, but effectively cut our RGOs in half, and we'd be taking a penalty to our food production because of the location rank modifier. But I think Lichtenberg would, in the end, we'd probably lose about 70 food production here, which means our location would technically still have a net positive, and our province would still have a net positive about 100, so I would feel very confident. In fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do. In this run, I turn Lichtenberg into a town because I can afford to reduce its RGO and food output, which again are linked but not exactly synonymous. And it's got great control, so I know that any buildings I make here, I'm going to be extracting max value. Whereas Neustadt over here would be a terrible choice for that right now, because currently the maximum control is only 35%. We get it up to about 45% with a town with a temple, but that is still garbage. Things will change once integration and stability things happen, but right now it looks garbage. Not only that, but this province, if we were to go and lose a bunch of our livestock, so we'd lose about half our livestock RGOs, probably get down to 6, and then we'd go from a plus 10% production modifier on food to a minus 20%, so a 30% change. I would assume in this location, probably, let's call it, maybe we'd be making about 80, maybe even less than that, but we'd lose about 80 food production here, which means that while this location, Neustadt itself, would still be feeding itself, not as well, but it would still be feeding itself, the province as a whole would have a food deficit, so we'd be forced to buy more from the market. So this doesn't feel as appealing right now. Whereas Leiningen was pretty good. Again, the wool has some money and is worth some food, but it's probably not as bad. Its control is still going to be pretty bad right now because I did just conquer this area, but that's a little healing. I would not be surprised, though, if later on Neustadt might be a good candidate to town up, even though losing some livestock would still hurt a bit. Sarvarden over here was much easier pick. It's relatively close to the capital, so it still has decent control. And it's clay. Clay's not worth very much. It's only worth half a point a unit? What? And you can't even eat the clay. Come on. So I had absolutely zero compunction. I don't know if I'm using the right word. It was not painful in any way whatsoever for us to cut our clay income down at all. Sarvarden was an excellent candidate for urbanization. And in fact, if we can go and keep developing it like crazy, I would have no objection to turning this into a city later on. Anyway, I hope you found this relatively useful. Again, to repeat, basically what I'd be looking for a candidate is, can I afford to lose some RGO production / food production? Do I feel like this place is going to have good control and therefore turn lots of profit from the buildings? If the answer to both those questions is yes, then this location is a great candidate for urbanizing. And again, going from a town to a city is less of a complicated question. Again, there's a couple of different modifiers. There's a couple of different there's some buildings that might only be built in a city, but the big thing I think at this stage in the game, my thing would be, do I need to increase my population capacity because I'm sitting at my cap, or for me, with all my money and all the buildings I'm building, do I need the extra supported buildings levels, which is substantially different. You know, if I wasn't able to build any buildings over here because I was at my building cap, and this was only a town, I would want to turn into a city at that point. So that's that. Hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching. If you're not subscribed, of course, make sure to do that for more Let's Plays and little tutorial videos. I'll see you next time, folks. Bye-bye.